What's the big debate about carrying a knife like this when backpacking? If you've spent any time on backpacking forums or watching YouTube videos about backpacking, you have for sure seen the debate about not carrying a knife in the backcountry. What's the deal with that debate anyway? I did some digging because I've wanted to know what the big debate is and why it's maybe a faux pas of backpacking. First off, if you have strong feelings about carrying a knife in the backcountry, not carrying a knife in the backcountry, if you've had experiences with either way, let me know. Leave it in the comments. Oh boy, I feel like there are some backpackers out there that are going to slay me for promoting carrying a knife like this in the backcountry. But you know what? Let's talk about it. I personally think it really comes down to what your hike is going to look like, what your trip is going to look like. If you are going to be spending, doing 20-mile days and just knocking those miles out, getting to camp, setting up camp, going to sleep, getting up, breaking camp and hiking out, you probably wouldn't get much use out of a knife having days like that. And that's great, trying to knock out those miles and just see tons of different, scenery and that kind of thing. That's totally cool. There's another way of thinking, and that's the people who are, they might hike several miles a day, but they're getting to camp early in the day, or at least in the evening, and they have several hours to just chill at camp. Maybe they'll do some fishing, maybe they'll do some, whittling or whatever, and a knife could come in handy. They're not about just getting there, just being as light as possible, and they do have time to kill at camp, and they want to enjoy it, and maybe that's what they do enjoy. So I see both camps. I see both ways of thinking, and I think it's important for us as backpackers to be a little lenient about that. I do think that there's some people who might feel like, well, I really want to take a knife, but I don't really want to be judged by the guy who calls himself a pro backpacker. And so I think just being chill is really important, and accepting them. And that's where in my opinion, that's where the phrase hike your own hike really comes in. So why do I almost always take a knife of some sort on hikes with me? This knife goes on 99% of the hikes, the backpacking trips that I do, and there's good reason. I enjoy doing a craft or two at camp. I will say that this knife right here has come in handy so many times for things around camp, like when I'm wanting to get some firewood, when I'm wanting to process firewood, if I'm wanting to split maybe a thin piece of wood into some kindling. It's super helpful for that kind of thing. I do also understand not wanting to carry a knife this size in your pack, because it does add a significant amount of weight compared to some of the other lightweight stuff that you might be carrying. But I'll tell you, this knife here doesn't add anything to my pack because I carry it on my belt. I don't even notice it's there most of the time when I'm hiking. It just hangs there. But when I do need it, I'm sure glad that I have it on my side. So it's really super nice. So that's another pro of carrying this knife, is just that it doesn't really add much weight. Another time that a knife like this comes in handy is if everything is wet and you're trying to start a fire and you need to get inside of a piece of wood. The inside will be dry, but the outside will be wet. In most cases, not all the time will the inside be dry, but the closer you get to the inside, the drier it's going to be. But you can create a feather stick with something like this. This wood probably isn't the best. And you can create some shavings with a knife. Any knife will do this, not just one of these bushcraft knives. But the argument is that why do you need a knife at all? I'll tell you what, trying to create a feather stick with this little tiny 1.5-inch, 1.25-inch blade right here on this Victorinox knife is going to be really difficult. And you can create some shavings with it, but I don't know, that just to me seems a little bit scary. I mean, it does work, but man, you'd be here for quite a while trying to get to the center of that. And I don't feel super safe with it, knowing that this thing, like, it just folded in on me right there. And so, yeah, just something that I wouldn't really trust. I wouldn't want to be making many, if any, feather sticks with this, doing much carving with this, because that blade doesn't lock. And so that's kind of scary for me. A knife like this size, I think this weighs just over an ounce, and this is this is something that's going to be very helpful. The blade does lock, and you could make a nice feather stick with this, or at least get some tinder for your fire. Got some shavings going on right there, but it's not really doing a great job. I'll tell you, the bigger knife is just so much nicer. This would be nice to carve with because it's small and you can control it, but if you're needing it for a survival situation for making a fire, that probably for me wouldn't be my go-to. I would be super stoked to know that I have this at camp. Then I can really just get some shavings going with it. And really get going on a feather stick once you get it going. This wood isn't the greatest, but it would do for getting some thin shavings and getting a feather stick going. So something like that, and then you could get this. These would light a lot faster. So just something to think about if just a pro for carrying a knife like this out in the backcountry. One other reason for carrying a knife is I've heard so many stories where people get out there and they say, oh crap, I forgot my tent stakes. But if you were able to find a piece of wood like this and you had a decent knife, a little Victorinox thing like this isn't going to cut it hardly at all. I'll tell you, that's going to be next to painful trying to create a stake out of this stick. Now if the ground's super soft, you could probably just shove it in the ground, but it's going to be way easier if you can carve a point on it. So if you were even a knife this size, you could, you know, start to chisel away at this, whittle this down and get it into a nice point. Okay, in a few seconds you got that down into a nice point, and that's going to go into the ground way easier for a tent stake. So that's that little knife. But then if you had something like this, I tell you, this thing makes much easier work of getting things done. And that's done. So again, creating a tent stake, if you forget your tent stakes, or if you need any extra tent stakes while you're out there, sometimes people take the bare minimum tent stakes. They take 4 tent stakes and they don't think, oh, I need to get out, I need to probably guy this out a little bit more. Or you have enough for your guy lines, yet it's going to be super windy and you want to guy it out even more. You want to attach a little bit more onto it so it's your tent's stronger. Or if you're under a tarp, then those are all good reasons to, you know, you might say, oh, I need another stake. And so I'll just create one of these. And this has worked multiple times out in the backcountry for me. If I don't need the extra weight of the stakes, then I'm going to leave them at home. But if I need one while I'm out there, I'm glad to have a knife and have it be multi-purpose. All right, so I've talked a lot about the pros of carrying a knife in the backcountry, but what are some of the concerns? What are some of the reasons that people say they don't want to carry a knife, or people shouldn't carry knives in the backcountry? For me, I've always kind of been pretty good with a knife, and so it's not really been something that I thought about, but I thought, you know, what are some of the reasons that people do have concerns with carrying a knife in the backcountry? One is that they don't have the skill to use a knife. They haven't practiced with it. They haven't picked one up to do things like creating, you know, whittling or that kind of thing. So they maybe don't feel comfortable with carrying a knife or using a knife. And I get it. If you're all the way in the backcountry and you're not comfortable with it and you slice your hand, yeah, you're going to have some problems, and that's going to make for a miserable trip. So I get that. Another reason for concern, or a reason people don't carry a knife, especially one like this, is because of the weight. These do add some weight to your pack if you're carrying it in your pack, no doubt. But if you are carrying it on a belt, then like I said earlier, it doesn't really add, I don't even notice it's on my belt. Most of the time when I'm hiking along, I'm like, oh, that's my knife, you know, and it's been great. And I just don't even notice it. But if you are carrying it in your pack, then yeah, for sure, you're going to notice a little bit extra weight in there. And then of course, if you don't wear pants or whatever that have a belt on them that can use a belt, then that's another thing to consider. If you've ever been kind of worried about carrying a knife, you wanted to, but you haven't wanted to add the weight to your pack, just consider wearing it on a belt or some other place than carrying it in your pack. And then of course, there is the thing of redundancy that I would say is real. You know, I'll carry this little tiny Victorinox knife with me, or multi-tool, I guess, because it's got more than just a knife on it. But it has this little knife, which I've talked about earlier, is one that I mean, this I would use for very little, like cutting a string maybe. I just don't feel very safe when it doesn't lock. Definitely this, you know, a multi-tool like this is kind of nice, that doesn't weigh very much. And I get the redundancy as well. Like I said, you might say, well, I already have a knife. Why would I carry another knife like this, or even a knife like this? And that's valid. You know, you do have a knife. If you're not planning on doing any sort of whittling, any sort of, you know, if you don't feel like you need to make any tent stakes or anything like that, then for sure, you know, this knife is probably going to do you just fine and cover all the reasons why you would ever need a knife if you're that type of backpacker. But if you are interested in doing anything and, you know, be outside of just small little, you know, cutting a string or whatever, then, you know, even a knife like this doesn't add a whole lot of weight, but it does come in handy. Redundancy is a thing, but I don't know. It's not adding a whole lot of weight. I don't carry this in my pack either. I just clip it on. It's got this little clip that I just clip it onto my chest strap and forget that it's there. There is the other thing about leave no trace, and that is definitely something to consider. If you're out there and you are cutting down live trees, you're cutting down stuff that shouldn't be cut, then yeah, definitely you're leaving an impact on the environment. So I definitely think that cutting down live trees is not okay in most places. There are some places that do allow that, depending on if they're trying to thin out some areas or depending on how regulated it is. But that's also something that backpackers need to know is, what are the regulations? What are the laws for that area? What are, you know, is it okay to cut down a dead standing tree? In the areas I go, I know that it's okay because they're already cutting down a ton of trees in a lot of the areas that I go because of a beetle that's killing trees. And so they're trying to clear this out. And there are a lot of dead standing trees. And so going in areas like that, it's totally okay to cut down a tree and to use it for firewood. So definitely do some research on the area before you get going out there and thinking, I'm going to cut down a tree. Another thing with leave no trace is people opt for not having a fire. I get that as well, you know, not leaving burn scars on the ground and stuff. But if there's a fire ring, then go ahead and you know, do that. If you're on snow and it's never gonna touch the ground and you just burn it to ash, then that's a different story as well, because you know, it's gonna eventually melt. It's never touched the ground, not left a burn scar on the ground, and you can then just have the wind blow the ash away once it dries, once the snow melts and the ground dries. There are some concerns with leave no trace, and there's more to leave no trace than that. I get it. I'm not going into all of the leave no trace stuff right now, but I do think that is a concern, a valid concern. And so, but that's part of educating yourself as a backpacker. So I think that the debate between carrying a knife backpacking or not carrying a knife backpacking kind of boils down to a few things. One, I think, is, and not first, but one of the things is just whether you like to have a knife out there. I mean, some people do. Some people are okay not having one. Some people prefer to not have one. I personally love to have a knife when I'm out there, and I take a knife on 99% of my trips, and I enjoy it, and I find that I use it on almost every single trip. That's my personal backpacking philosophy. That's another thing that it kind of boils down to as well. What is your backpacking philosophy? Is it 100% you're never gonna cut a piece of wood because it's, you know, someone might see that you cut a piece of wood? That's fine. If that's your thing, great. go for it. I'm okay carving a piece of wood out there. I mean, I would rather not see toilet paper all over the place. Let's talk about that if we're going to talk about leave no trace. Anyway, that's for a different video, which I'll do. But we'll talk about that. Another thing that I think is also very, you know, kind of the essence of this is risk management. If you're out there, yeah, there's potential to slice your hand with a knife. If you're unskilled, unfamiliar with a knife, if you don't know what you're doing with it, then yeah, for sure, like, don't take a knife if you're not comfortable having a knife or using a knife or unskilled with it. So we've got a few things here. So like, you've got some risk assessment, your own backpacking philosophy, and then you also have the, whether you like it or not, need. If you feel like there's a need for having a knife out there, go for it. Again, personal preference, and I think that's where we should go as a community, and not be always telling everybody that, you know, you're not a pro backpacker if you carry a knife like this one here. I've had plenty of times out in the backcountry, and I spend a lot of nights out there, and I'll tell you, I wouldn't consider myself a novice backpacker, but I carry one of these on almost every single trip. I think the biggest thing though is if you want to carry one but you haven't, you're kind of a little bit worried about the risk of it because you're unfamiliar with it, grab one and practice. I think the biggest worry is people getting out there and not having used a knife or any gear that they go out there with, which is another story as well. Biggest thing for me is stay safe out there, enjoy the backcountry, whatever's getting you out there. If it's taking a knife, great. If you don't want to take a knife, great. Anyways, hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, think about doing that. And again, hope to catch you on the next one, and stay safe out there.